With the greater reliance on electronic records, there's also a greater need for being prepared if a disaster hits. In this section of the New York State Archives webinar on preserving electronic records in colleges and universities, we will discuss ways to avoid damage or loss to your electronic records, as well as ensuring access to these records in the appropriate time after a disaster occurs. We are all aware of the results of a major disaster that led to the loss of many lives as well as records. While these events have been obvious tragedies, we should also not forget the less obvious items that could make records unreadable. A simple water pipe leak in one department can have devastating effects, especially if it's in your department. It would be the same with an accidental sprinkler discharge. A gas leak or chemical spill could force the evacuation from your building or campus. A disgruntled employee could wreak havoc with your files or infrastructure, and you need to be aware of this possibility. I know of one organization that had a bomb scare called in. It closed down the operation for a day, and there was no contingency plan in place. So no work was done that day, and further put staff behind in their work at the busiest time of year for them. Disasters can occur from within. As within the computer, whether it is a hardware problem, a virus, or some other form of data being corrupted, will cause severe problems. What happens if the data corruption was not found until several days or weeks later, after the backup tapes may have been overwritten? So why is being prepared in the event of a disaster and having a business continuity plan in place important? Well, if you have a unique file, one in which only one copy exists, and you have a disaster, the chances of having a damaged or completely unrecoverable record is very high. There are at least 7 things you need to have in place to better prepare yourselves in the event of a disaster affecting your institution. You must have a duplicate copy of your electronic collection stored at an off-site location. Having a backup tape or device stored next to the server at the same location is not going to do a whole lot of good if the building is inaccessible or is totally lost in a disaster. You also need physical access to that remote copy of your files when needed, not days or weeks after the event occurs. Access to the remote copies is one thing, also having the appropriate device to read the tape and files could be another. Do you have the same backup drive and other necessary hardware and software at the off-site location? You will need the same version of the backup software, the operating system, and all the device drivers to restore those files. You have to have your policies and procedures well documented and have multiple copies of those documents readily available for the team members. Don't just have one copy in each worker's office. Have copies at home, since if a disaster is going to occur, it will probably be after hours when no one is in the office. Designate who is leading the preparedness effort, who is the team leader, and who are the team members. Writing a plan is only part of the answer. You must make sure that everyone is aware of the plan and the steps they need to take, so educating all staff and doing regular training on the process is key. Related to the above is the need to do periodic testing, at least once a year. Evaluate the test results and adjust your plan accordingly. Plans will always need to be adjusted as processes and people change over time. Of course, there are things you should not do, like storing the backup tape in the same room as the server you just backed up. If a disaster occurs within the server room, both the original and the backup copy of your records will be lost. Don't just assume the backup process worked. Did you review the backup log for errors? There may be particular files that did not get backed up. Have you ever tried to restore a backup tape? Restoring a backup tape is considered a best practice, but unfortunately it is not often performed. This will make sure that you can recover from the backup media of all the necessary files. 5 steps you can perform to help ensure you are prepared in the event of a disaster are: first, check to see if another area within your institution has a disaster recovery plan. If so, see how you may be able to modify this plan to work in your environment. Next, have a disaster preparedness assessment done to identify not only the valuable single source records, but to also identify proprietary or non-supported or failing systems that could create a situation where records are not recoverable. Third, taking what you now know, either develop or modify a disaster recovery plan. Make sure you share it with other institutions and your peers to get their input as well. Next, you have to train your staff and departments on the content and procedures contained within the plan. Don't forget to include prevention steps and general awareness of the issues also. And finally, you have to test the plan. You need to test and retest the plan and continually adjust the plan as things change. Some areas to consider when preparing or enhancing your disaster recovery plan should consider collaborating with other organizations within your area. Instead of trying to fund a new recovery site on your own, you should leverage other site locations for use as a hot site. Consider local governments, businesses, and other institutions for not only sharing a site, but also sharing other recovery resources such as staff and supplies if an event occurs. Establishing mutual aid agreements between different organizations makes sense for many. Coordinating your efforts with other emergency plans is a step that can be often overlooked, but should be done to ensure specific plans do not conflict with each other and have any redundancies eliminated. Think about any small or even large disaster that you may have experienced. How did you or others respond? What would you do differently if you could do it all over? Learn from your own experiences as well as others to better prepare you for possible future events. This concludes Section 6. We encourage you to continue on to Section 7 of this webinar on preserving electronic records in colleges and universities, where we'll offer some suggested steps to set up an action plan for your institution.